many games, you can find depths in a product that you yourself would never Hello, everyone. Oh, fuck. Hello, everyone, and welcome to my official Snoozr 2020 in review, featuring my very own list of the best games this year. Sike, bitch! You really thought I was gonna have a top 10 list or some dumb shit like that? Get out! Get out! Get out! Something I noticed this year above all other years is just how much my focus for games has narrowed. Beforehand, I could play just about any game in any genre and have a grand old time blasting away nondescript terrorists in a foreign country, but now my tastes are refined. Granted, refined about as much as crude oil, but refined nonetheless. The simple things just don't engage with me like they used to. My fixation with puzzles and narrative-based games has almost completely dominated my evenings, and if it's a narrative-based puzzle game, then it's absolutely fucking over, dude. So I guess by that description, Resident Evil 3 should be pretty high on my list of favorite games for this year, and you'd be right if you weren't paying attention to the intro of this video and this channel, but points for trying at least. I can honestly say that it's not something unique to this game that I have a problem with, but this is the one that came out this year, so its 3 makes cross to bear. While I did enjoy the gameplay that hasn't changed in over 3 years, I'll be the first to admit that the narrative in this game leaves something to be desired. As I'm sure all of you know, my biggest problem with the recent Resident Evil titles is that their story has lots of potential that goes nowhere, almost every time. I can't think of a particular time where a narrative moment shocked me in any of these games, and it doesn't help that my eagerness for this one in particular entered the stratosphere after the Resident Evil 2 remake. It was destined to be in the shadow of its former self, because with the new generations of sequels comes expectation. People didn't expect 3 Remake to be the game to shift into an action thriller, they wanted a Resident Evil 2 DLC, which is why it's so unfortunate that the marketing for this game wasn't altered more, despite the fact that we've done this song and dance before. I've said it once and I'll say it again, Resident Evil 3 was not a carbon copy of Resident Evil 2 back in the 90s. If anything, 3 Remake is more faithful to the original than most people would probably expect, and I commend Capcom for committing to that. In spite of its massive popularity of Resident Evil 2 Remake, I'm glad that Capcom stuck to their roots for 3 Remake because adhering to fans would have only caused problems in the long run and create an unhealthy relationship in the future, Microsoft, but that's a topic for a different time. Something else that I noticed this year was just how much catching up I had to do on the big releases, which is something that I'm going to end up doing a lot of next year as well. I started a lot of the most prolific releases from the past couple years, but the one that stuck with me the most has been, well, you guys already know. Now, I will admit that if you had asked me before September, Nier Automata would have absolutely taken the top spot here. And in some instances, I still think Nier deserves that top spot, but the way that I determined which game I enjoyed more is this. I liked Nier Automata a lot, but it didn't get me to read a book. The Witcher, on the other hand, has single-handedly discouraged and encouraged my desire to get into fantasy storytelling, because there's so much here that I want to put my own spin on, but I know deep down that Andrzej Sapkowski's books will always reign supreme. There's so much to this world that I've just fallen in love with. It's the mixture of fairy tale and folklore and the romanticized magical concepts to the very real and heartless treatment that both human, elves, monsters, and creatures face in this world, and everything that connects it together. I've talked about this before, but my absolute favorite thing about this world is how fearless it is to portray violence and taboo. I have never, especially in fantasy, experienced a story that is this unapologetic in its portrayal, and with so much nuance that you're not even sure if objectively good is something that exists here. The world and characters are realized so well that they feel natural to me. Like I could walk down the street and bump into any one of them. And despite playing it a quarter of a year ago, I've remembered so much of it like it happened yesterday. I'm not going to gush about this game anymore, but I'll leave it at this. If you have not played The Witcher 3, fuck it. If you haven't played any of the Witcher games or read any of the books, and you enjoy a narrative that makes you genuinely think and wraps you in from the moment it starts, then you are doing yourself a disservice by not experiencing what's here. I wouldn't even consider myself a big fantasy reader, but these stories are worth experiencing even if you're not huge on the genre. I can safely say that The Last Wish is one of my favorite books of all time, and I'm not even close to being done with it. You know, as much as we talk about the big things and the big releases of this year, it's also good to remember the smaller things. The games and topics that don't get the attention they deserve, and have just as much, if not more, to offer than fully fledged titles. That's why I found out the title that surprised me the most this year was Perfect Vermin, which is made by fewer people than I can count on one hand. That being said, apart from the actual length of the game, there's nothing about it that I would say is of a lesser quality than bigger studios can offer. In fact, this game being so short actually plays into the core narrative of the game. I have played obscenely long games, and I have played games that are even shorter than this, yet it's always overtly felt like budgetary constraints rather than a genuine choice. These devs, on the other hand, seem like they fully accomplished their vision and were able to polish and present it to its fullest capacity. I'm purposely avoiding as much as possible about this game in both description and in the footage I'm showing, because I genuinely believe that this game is worth playing. And if you have a PC that was made before the Stone Age, you can probably play this game right now. It's free on Steam. Just search Perfect Vermin in your Steam store and you'll be able to play it in the next few minutes, assuming you don't have to feed your internet with the blood of the innocent. And with that, that's all I have for the recap this year. I guess I'll see you all this time next year for my next recap. Okay, fine, here's my list. Now let it be known there are a lot of games this year that I didn't get to play, most notable among them being Ghost of Tsushima, Animal Crossing, Doom Eternal, Half-Life Alyx, Cyberpunk Phasmophobia, Hades, Squadrons, even though it wouldn't have made this list anyways, Final Fantasy VII, or anything released past November. It's not that I have anything against these games, except Squadrons because I'm awful at aerial-based combat games. It's just that I only had enough time to play so many games. So if you find that one of your top games this year isn't on here, it's because I didn't have the chance to play it. Or it's bad. We're going to start with a zombie game, and we're going to end with a zombie game, because despite what big man Neil Druckmann might say about his clickers, I've never been convinced that these aren't just zombies with a loot crate skin on it. All that being said, though, for being my first foray into this twisted world, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how quickly I was able to get wrapped up into this world and its characters. I'm not talking about the story right now because God knows that ship sailed long before the game even came out, but walking through the Seattle realization felt pretty surreal, even if I've never been there before. The gameplay here is probably the smoothest combat system I've ever used since Resident Evil 7, which is really satisfying to both use and watch on screen because just of how much love and care the developers put into this game, and you all better fucking acknowledge that before the devs give up and start churning out products like a Ubisoft game. The emotional journey that this game presents you with is one that I find increasingly rare that writers are able to do right, which is going to be a really great contradiction with the rest of my entries, but knowing that up front is going to make a lot of my picks for this list make sense. I really wish that I could say more about this game, but a lot of this game's magic is experienced through playing it, and I wouldn't want to spoil that for any of you, unlike some people. If I were to say anything about it beforehand, I would warn you that this game will put you on an emotional roller coaster. It is violent, it is cruel, it is sad, and it is something that I'm glad I went through to get an appreciation of the value of this genre, even though I don't ever want to play it again. This roller coaster of emotion through narrative is genuinely phenomenal, and yet I would argue that a game with absolutely no narrative allows for an even greater personal story. Welcome, one and all, to Manifold Gardens, a game made by William Chair Studios, and one that has somehow managed to give me an anxiety attack on accident. Now, I feel like this game might be going under the radar a bit because 1, it's a puzzle game, and 2, it doesn't have any qualities that would give it a familiar feeling, unlike some other games we'll get to later. However, upon playing it, you'll soon realize that this game's greatest strength is player discovery. I kid you not when I say that there's not a single word spoken in this game that gives you any insight as to what's going on here, and that's what makes it so unique. Manifold doesn't feel the need to give you an explanation, and thus you're able to form your own story based on what you think is happening here. This MC Escher-esque garden is a reflection of your own mind, based on what you choose to interpret its symbolism as. You get to exist in this void of reality and solve a task for a purpose that only you can understand. Are you curing a plague, defeating corruption, or are you just freeing your own mind? This game's emptiness is filled up by you, the player, and it gives a more personal connection than even the greatest story ever told could, because, at the end of the day, someone else is telling that story. Manifold Gardens is all about what you make of it. That personal and intimate feeling is something that I've grown to enjoy about games nowadays, and considering just how much realism I'm willing to put off to be invested into a fictional story, it shouldn't be any surprise that a game that is essentially a step up from a children's book made it onto my list. Though to give it its fair credit, the fact that this game was something on my radar at all wouldn't have been possible if the people at Giant Sparrow didn't already make me question existence itself a few years prior. But comparing these two games is pretty hard to do considering just how different their focus was. It'd be much easier to compare two games from different companies vying for the same melting pot of gamers rather than compare Titanfall and Telltale's A Wolf Among Us. Because as much as I adore what remains of Edith Finch, it's this game that made me appreciate just how creative these developers actually are. Giant Sparrow weren't developers who managed to struck gold with their storytelling one time, they've been doing this shit for a while, which made the Unfinished Swan such a surprising experience. Now yes, it is technically 8 years old, but the re-release and port onto PC and iOS make it count as a 2020 release, and I'm taking all the chances I can fucking get here. Now, with this being a Giant Sparrow, Annapurna Interactive, Santa Monica Studio, yes, that Santa Monica Studio collaboration, the story here must be absolutely phenomenal, right? Well, while I will say that the narrative is solid, I think what this game does better than anything else is its integration of story and gameplay. Considering that the narrative frame is a children's book, it's not exactly hard to integrate the two, yet it does manage to strike a chord that's worthy of praise. I might say a lot of things that come off as exaggerated or outlandish, but I can say with full confidence that the beginning chapter of this game is as perfect as this kind of a narrative-focused game has ever felt to me. This game has one of, if not the best narrative gameplay connections I've ever played with, because with the overwhelming amount of story games that I've played in the past couple of years, none of them have made me feel as in tune with the protagonist through gameplay as this game does in its first few moments. The sense of exploration and how it links to the story and makes you feel like you have an actual presence here is something completely unique to this game, and it's why I'm not using any footage from that segment, because I would never want to spoil that experience for anyone. It's one of those things that I wish I could sell more people on, because while a children's book version of a walking sim sounds awful on paper, it's the actual execution here that I believe should be admired. If you started to notice a theme here, it's that the vast majority of these games are ones that I find push the limitations of what games and stories can be in this medium. It's why so many people lose their minds over the next big surprise, even when some of them can completely fall under the radar, and as much as I like these games and enjoyed what they offered to me, one of the biggest reasons that these games haven't sold as well as they should is because puzzles and narrative don't align with the coke-snorting, Dorito-dripping, Baja Blast IV gamer culture that so many other games pandered to. Do you honestly believe that Kevin from High School English is going to drop his 4-kill streak just to play a game that makes you question your own existence? Or the boys are going to play a game that completely changes their own reality? Because even if you might get them to play it, there's a very good chance that they won't enjoy it as much as you might have. The reason that I enjoy these games is because I enjoy looking at things from a new perspective, which is something you might have caught on to in my Superliminal review. I love the idea that everything is relative to everything else, that nothing is purely concrete and everything is subject to change. That's probably why I struck a chord with this game so easily. It ticks the boxes on what I want in a puzzle game. The mechanics in this game are so good that I honestly wish there was some form of a sandbox to play around with it, or a custom level creator for those who love this game and want to continuously support it, like I do. There's honestly not a whole lot of this game that I have a problem with, and even though some of the things I do find problematic, it's mostly fixed by those sections being one-offs, where said stupid mechanic is only around for a short time. This game's brevity is its biggest strength, and the fact that I'm longing for more of it should only emphasize its quality. The music, the gameplay, the writing, it's all so top-notch that I don't even know what you can do to improve it. But all I do know is that I want more, and I want more people to play it. The thing about that is this: as much as some people don't like puzzle games and the soundtrack's so good that I could play it in public and not get stared at weird, unlike some other soundtracks, it's at least 10 times easier to convince people to buy that rather than my #1 game for this year. Because while I might defend the $20 price tag for a 3-hour game, I don't think anyone could defend the investment of an entire VR setup, the constant troubleshooting and fixing required to set up certain parts of it, and the potential motion sickness just to play a Walking Dead game. Considering just how mangled that walking corpse of a franchise is at this point, it's practically a miracle that a new IP can come out and actually be decent, and it'd be damn near impossible for it to actually be a noteworthy game in its own right. And yet, I would very strongly argue that The Walking Dead Saints and Sinners is worth the investment for what I got out of it, because this game did exactly what the Telltale series did, and they made it work in a VR format better than they had any right to. See, the biggest thing that I hate about narrative-focused VR titles is that they don't allow the protagonist to be a character separate from the player. The character that every other person in the story is talking to isn't you, it's the vessel that you're currently inhabiting, and there is no way for you to break out of that. Red Matter is one of the most critically acclaimed VR titles out now, and without spoiling any more of it, it commits this problem worse than most other titles, but that's a story for another time. Saints and Sinners sidesteps this issue completely by A, giving you your own voice and dialogue options, and B, giving you the opportunity to express yourself through conversations and gameplay. This is arguably the first fully playable VR RPG survival horror game that's out on the market, and there is no half-assing on any of these mechanics. In fact, there's a lot in this game that I think is a significant improvement to most other titles on the market, including the standard modes of interaction. Think about your favorite RPG. Chances are there is something inhibiting you from acting out as the absolute lunatic that you are deep down inside and potentially killing one of the main characters. That makes sense, the game isn't prepared for you to turbo kill your run this quickly, so it prevents you from ever being able to do so. Now let's go back to Saints and Sinners. In one of the earliest missions, you are tasked with meeting up with May, one of the two main characters that you will be interacting with throughout your entire journey down here in Louisiana. After a couple of days in-game, she asks you to meet face-to-face and have an open conversation about what is going on in the city and the main forces at play here. This is your first conversation, one of many conversations with her throughout the game, and there is absolutely nothing stopping you from doing this.
Don't get used to meeting like this. It's a rarity.
Not only have the developers not put any fake barriers to stop you from doing something, they've explicitly planned for it and somewhat encourage it as well. What shocked me more than anything while playing this game is just how subtle the game influences your decisions and just how powerful the impact is when you realize that nothing you did was scripted. To give you another example of what I mean by this, at the very beginning of the game you are introduced to Henri, a survivor in New Orleans who gives you a rundown on the overarching plot here that is accompanied by the cinematic of the city devolving into chaos. Afterward, once you regain control and take a stroll through the crypt, you find him hanging by his feet on the verge of death, and you hear his final words before he dies. If you stay for a few minutes longer, you watch him turn into a walker and wriggling in the binds, and you can either leave him here or end his suffering and let his body rest. Once you get past this scene, the game continues and gives you more details about the story and plot, but what still shocks me to this day about this scene is that none of it was a scripted event. You can completely walk past Henri in this scene or kill him as soon as you see him, and the game is prepared for you to skip this heartbreaking and traumatic experience. There are dozens of moments in this game where I had to come to terms with what was happening around me, genuinely shaking and panicking at everything that I witnessed with my own eyes, and the horrible thought that kept pestering me that there was something I could do to avoid it. And all of this is weighed doubly on your shoulders by it being in the most immersive medium we have today. Telltale's The Walking Dead is one of the saddest stories that I have personally ever experienced, but I didn't cry when I played it for the first time because at the end of the day, I could separate myself from Lee because he was the one enacting out my choices. When I killed Henri in the first 10 minutes of the game after knowing nothing about him, I was shaking for weeks on end because I chose to do that. And at every single choice that this game gave me, I knew that it was a reflection of myself more than anyone else. I've already said far more than I wanted to about this game and how it manages to give you an existential crisis just by existing, so I think I'm going to leave it at this. This game is a title that I think people should play to understand why VR is the future of gaming. Because while Half-Life VR might be the second coming of Christ, I believe that Saints and Sinners deserve the same amount of love and respect and praise that Half-Life Alyx has received. The amount of freedom that this game allows you to exude is rare for even the most popular of RPGs that are made around player agency and choice. Regardless of what you choose, you don't get the freedom to express yourselves in the ways that you want to because, at the end of the day, you're not you. You're Commander Shepard, Captain of the Normandy, or Geralt of Rivia, the White Wolf. But here, you're just a tourist, and the game doesn't pretend that you are anything more than that. You're not playing a character, you're surviving an apocalypse in a war-torn, destroyed, half-flooded city, and that's all the game expects of you. Unlike its predecessors, your choices actually matter here, not to the world, but to how you view yourself.
Give it a ponder, tourist. You just might be what this sinking city needs to keep its head above water. But then again, maybe you're the type to pull the whole godforsaken place under.
Happy holidays, everyone. I hope you guys managed to enjoy this list and all that I had to say. There's a good chance that I'll be taking a break after this video for a little while. The past 3 months have been incredibly hectic and I need to recoup and get my life back on track somewhat. However, that doesn't mean that I won't be working on new content. In fact, my next project will be concerning a particular #1 spot. Stay safe, everyone. See you soon.